Next month will mark the 50th anniversary of a moment that would define the civil rights movement of the South and change the course of history. The March on Selma, Alabama, and the moments leading up to that fateful day are now chronicled on the big screen in an Oscar-nominated film. But did you know that there are a few local connections? Here's more. It sparked outrage around the world, igniting an international call for change. March 7, 1965 would go down in history as one of the most horrific and volatile events in the fight for freedom, earning the name Bloody Sunday. On that day, some 600 marchers from across the country assembled in Selma en route to Montgomery, Alabama. They were stopped short of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. George Shinholster had worked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others in Selma prior to that day.
To have the opportunity of listening and sitting at the feet, so to speak, to Dr. King and listening to those kind of remarks, you know, if a man hasn't something for which he's willing to die, he's not fit to live. I think 50 years later I can be somewhat philosophical. Then I was just ready to get up and be a part of a movement that was exactly that. It was a movement, but it was also something of a vortex that would sick you in and pull you in, and you could go, be, and do.
Shinholster wasn't in Selma on Bloody Sunday, but another Savannaian was, Amelia Boynton.
Mrs. Boynton was one of the founders for the Dallas County Voters League, and a dynamo even at that age. And this was long before any of the national organizations went to Selma.
Often referred to as the matriarch of the voting rights movement, Boynton began fighting for voting rights in the poorest parts of Alabama in the 1930s, shortly after leaving Savannah. In the 1960s, she opened her home for planning sessions and provided shelter for fellow activists, including a young Shinholster.
Her house was a pivotal place, as I recall, because when I first went to Selma, that's where we went.
When the movement began to pick up steam, it was Boynton who encouraged Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to join the cause.
We must march. We must stand up. You march those people into rural Alabama, it's got to be open season.
Her role as a civil rights pioneer is depicted in the movie Selma and the moment she nearly lost her life. This picture has become an iconic image of what would transpire. Boynton beaten unconscious and left in the street. Broken but not defeated, she and others would organize yet another march just 2 weeks later. And in less than 5 months, a symbol of success, as President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Their cause must be our cause too.
It was a major victory that Shinholster says puts the battle for equality into perspective.
There's an adage that nothing is as strong as an idea whose time has come. And if you're in the Black Belt of Alabama, where there was so much oppression that had already transpired, and there were people there whose ideals was enough is enough.
In 2011, Boynton returned to Savannah. News 3 was there as she spoke to students at Savannah State University. She shared these words with the next generation.
We have come a long way, but we've got a longer way to go. In business, in professions, in everything. We can't stop.
And she hasn't. At 103 years old, she continues to fuel others with the same fire that has always burned inside of her.
She endured. She knew the risks. She knew the challenges, and she faced them. She met them head on, and she had the kind of persistence that I wished I could have, even more so, you know. And she has, and she's triumphed.
Although Mrs. Boynton is perhaps best known as the woman at the front of the March on Selma, what many may not know is that she also played a role in the women's suffrage movement. She knew George Washington Carver, and in 1964, she was the first African-American woman and the first female Democratic candidate to run for Congress in Alabama.